if you get to the point where you can kind of self-reflect and build that self-awareness, that's like crucial to finding your own like personal fulfillment. But I think like purpose is such a core component. Like when we're talking about separating work from employment, I think like with work, what we're talking about is like, I have some sense of purpose and I'm going to go create an impact, cause and effect on the world. And employment's like, part of my job is to like get some paid, get paid to put food on the table and a roof over my head.
Hard work, hard work, that's what they say. Hard work, I earn my pay. Hard work, do it every day.
Welcome to another Work Ethic podcast. And I'm here today with actually a new connection, someone I'm really excited to talk to, Greg Rancourt of OneWork, founder of OneWork, correct? So before I toss this to you, man, I want you to introduce yourself, but I am, for the sake of introduction, really intrigued by OneWork and what you guys do. And I wanted to just read this little thing from your website, because I think for listeners of the show, it'll resonate why I'm so excited to talk to you. You know, this is the Work Ethic podcast, and I have a deep love for and belief in kind of our relationship to work. And so I have been looking forward to this. Dahlia said we needed to talk, and since I looked you guys up, I've been excited about this. So here's on their website under the About Us, it says, we believe work is an unrivaled vehicle for opportunity and fulfillment, and work has the power to touch lives, drive innovation, enable change, and inspire others. But work without purpose, without a mission, is empty. We envision a community capable of facing the most pressing challenges and opportunities of our generation. We're here to help you find the most meaningful work of your career. Together, we'll leave the world better than we found it. And then it kind of gets into your values, which I'm sure we'll come across here in this episode. But Greg, I'm going to just toss you the ball, introduce yourself to everybody else, and we'll just roll from there.
Sure. So thanks for having me. Definitely excited to have this conversation. I got to say, like, it sounds really good when you read all that off.
Yeah, you're like, oh man, we wrote something good.
Perfect. Yeah. So my name is Greg Rancourt. I started OneWork about a year ago. And our whole thing is we focus on basically matching high quality talent to social and environmental impact careers. So kind of like top view of the world, the way we kind of see it, like there's any number of challenges that we need to be solving in the world today, whether it's war or climate change, racial and gender equality, and the list kind of goes on and on. And we said, if you took that in totality, how would you go solve it? And for us, it really comes down to the way people spend their time. And so kind of our theory of change is if we can reorient talent, really great people working on these scale problems, not only will those people find more fulfillment in the work that they're doing, but they will kind of create these really powerful downstream impacts on their families, their communities, and ultimately the world at large. And so that's kind of like our core ethos. And like I said, I started this about a year ago. Before that, I was in aerospace and defense, which is like super mission driven group of people. You're definitely thinking about like brother, sister, aunt, uncle, mother, father is out on that ship, and you want to make sure they get home for the holidays. Being in the trenches, like super important work. And so that's, a key driver for me is like, I felt like that definitely resonated, and I don't see that necessarily happening today with the world at large, and want to create that opportunity for more people and hope, tip the tides, let's say.
Man, so there's so much I already want to ask you about. I do want to go kind of back in time a little bit before we do. Restate the way you said that was, because you said, I'm sure this is like we do this. It was like high quality people for impact career, something. Just say that again, because I want to make sure that I get it for the framing.
Yeah. So ultimately, these problems really comes down to the way we're spending our time, and like a third of that time that we spend at work. So there's tons of exceptionally talented people out there, including those where like that potential is, given someone that fixed mindset, how can we repurpose that in the growth mindset and reorient them to focus on the problems that really need to be solved in the world? So if I've got a software engineer, I could be making, app filters, but there's all sorts of other ways you can be applying that technology, making the same amount of money and ultimately creating more impact.
No, I agree completely. And on the impact side, how did you frame that? You said there's a word before impact. Was it social impact? Did you say environmental first? Is that, or
Yeah.
you were saying,
So
or is that a focus for you guys? Or because then you rattled off like some social and other equity type stuff that was like that. That's where I was kind of trying to figure out what was the frame of focus of impact there.
yeah, so like the umbrella that we kind of look at is social and environmental impacts.
Okay.
And kind of unique to the way we connect talent, we look at 9 different mission focus areas. And
Okay.
so you come on and let's say you resonate with education, or you resonate with poverty, or DE&I, or health and wellness. That's kind of how we group all of our career opportunities. And part of that is like, we really want to, again, going back to like performance and how do we solve these problems? Like if we can get people who are super passionate about that particular issue, that's where a lot of that grit comes from on these like deeply complex and seemingly intractable challenges. And so we want to create those like really strong emotional ties to the work as well.
Man, this is so good. I love it. Okay. So let's go a little bit back in time first. A year ago. So you started this a year ago. That's mid-COVID. You were doing aerospace and defense. Is what happened? What, like, why?
Yeah. So I think what was kind of interesting is like, I got to a point in that career in that particular job where I was in more of like a supporting role as an engineer. So like I had done a lot of that frontline work, but then sort of grown into a role where I was supporting like a team or then like groups of teams, and really kind of fell in love with that and trying to help people. Really, my job was like to remove impediments and blocks. And so like to be the guy that's just coming in like busting up problems really resonated. And then sort of like coincident with that, kind of feeling the weight of the world and like all the things that we were kind of going through. And I think like COVID for a lot of people just kind of brought a sense of clarity. And so I felt like I was doing work that was definitely important, resonated. I believed in what we were doing. But also felt like I think I'm capable of creating more impact. I could do more for the world if I go off and try to solve something at what I'll consider like an infrastructure level, something that's highly scalable. And so really it was born out of this like thought experiment and where mentally I was at the time of, if you're actually going to go solve these problems, where do you start? Like, where's that pressure point?
And tell me about the exact, so you're like, this is born out of this experiment. You asked this kind of question. Is there a clear like moment of answer and then beginning like, and therefore I did, because like I'm looking at like what you guys have, you're a year in, but I imagine this isn't day one, right? And so like I imagine even still are like finding your way a little bit in terms of like how we frame, how we recruit, how we make these connections, like how our processes work. Like, I mean, this is everything started in its first couple of years is like in this formation process, which is fun and beautiful. But like, what is the moment, the kind of aha, like, oh, I know what to do. Like, how did you answer that question? How did that light bulb go on? And then, what's the eureka moment? And then what do you do?
Yeah. So like part of my background, I mentioned like aerospace and defense, but part of my background is change management. And so a lot of times I like to look at like what we're doing in some sense. We're a change management company. And it just so happens that the delivery mechanism for that change is work. And so I think the eureka moment, so to speak, is it really comes down to the way people spend their time. And then digging into, a couple of facets of that, either why don't people spend more time on these types of things? Where do people spend the bulk of their time? And that's how we figured out like, well, the delivery mechanism is the work. Like people have to work. If there were a way for you to align those two things, the work that they're doing, the time that they're already spending, and these problems that need to be solved, and understand why those two things are misaligned today, then you could go solve that problem. And so
no,
I'll pause there.
I think you're exactly, I mean, that's exactly right. Cause even when we break the, we're like, oh, we finally secured an 8-hour workday, and we break the, 8 hours of work, 8 hours of recreation, and 8 hours of sleep, or however we broke up our 24-hour cycle, like theoretically. But you're going, there's a tremendous amount of your waking hours. And if you're like, so for me, even historically, like I had like, let's say, a burning obsession with some of the issues going on around me, particularly related to homelessness here in Tampa. But this, like, then you listen to these friends, and all of a sudden you care about this other thing and this other thing. And it's just like this interconnected network of, like you said, intractable problems or whatever, which, by the way, I love that kind of stuff. My mind can't stop gnawing on them. But I was like, I can't. So initially it was bivocational. It's like, well, you have to be bivocational to do that. So you're like, I laid tile for years. I was laying tile, and I love laying tile, by the way. Like, you get up, you're like, look at that job I did. It's all like, I like doing it. I took all of these jobs because I have bills to pay. I got to make some money. I got to whatever. But my mind was, I was like, I actually judged jobs by how little they used my brain, so that I could be elsewhere planning for what I do when I leave, right? Because I would shoot out of work to go get busy working, like with what mattered, right? In this like bivocational sense. But you're right, that's a special situation. There are people like that, and they're doing it. That's kind of not the issue. That's not the majority of people spending all their, because they get out of work and they're exhausted, and they have family, and there's other things they care about, and they actually do need to sleep, or they have friends they want to connect with. Like, it's only the, like, the possessed or the obsessed or something, that like somebody's captive by this thing and they're already in it. They don't need your help because they're in it because whatever. And so you go, you know what, we've actually got to dial this into, which in my mind, even like with the bike shop and things we do, like I've kind of taken like I want to build companies that are aimed at meeting these kind of needs in our community. So What About Bikes is exactly that. I don't know how much you're familiar with that, but like, it's like, look, a major issue with our friends on the streets in Tampa Bay, where it's super spread out and built for cars, is I can't get anywhere. And access is the underlying issue most of the time. I don't have food. Why? What's way over there? I don't have maybe a job. Why? I can't get there on time. Like, we have no public transport. And I was like, and then we saw friends with bicycles, and we're like, they don't have all the same problems. They're actually able to meet a lot of their own more basic needs. So we're like, all right, we're going to make bikes. And that started just doing it in a homeless co-op behind a drop-in center. But eventually I was like, we could sell some of these, make a sustainable model. And now we have like it's a business. To me, the goal of that business is to break even. It doesn't like throw off capital. It throws off like social impact. It's like, it sustains itself, pays the staff, pays the insurance, keeps the lights on. Oh, and by the way, last month we did X number of Earn a bikes, and we were able to do this value as sliding scale repairs for folks that couldn't afford to keep their bike working. And I'm curious, like I wanted to kind of share some of these I was excited to bounce some of these things off of each other to kind of like find our way, because I expect there's some real overlap in like vocation between you and I, and even like what we're even aiming at. So anyway, love to hear like your thoughts on like that approach. And then, but also to go, amen, you're right. Like, it's really important that our revenue generated. This is why I think like nonprofits can't just raise money, just be the panhandler to solve these problems. They have to make some money. But then there's all these businesses that, and by the way, we're not saying okay anymore. Like, businesses have to have some impact or do some social good, or the market is going to turn on them. We've just been seeing this over the last few decades. Like, that used to work. It's not going to anymore. They're going to demand that. And there is more and more merging of these things where the tax distinction doesn't matter as much as like the spirit of the thing itself, or the neighborliness of or the value to the community of the enterprise or the business itself. Go ahead, jump in. Like, I want to hear what you're thinking.
Yeah, it's like there's a number of things in that. I think I'll offer a couple of things. So one is, to your point about people kind of like buying with their values. The statistics, something like 2/3 of people are buying based on values. Like, that's the discriminator when all other things are equal. And I think you're definitely seeing that in the workforce as well. Like, LinkedIn put out a survey a couple of months ago. showed the number one thing that Gen Y and Gen Z were looking for in their next role was work that aligned with their values. And so I think you're going to see that's how companies kind of have to compete. And, if you even look retroactively, George Floyd, abortion is like kind of the topic of the day, right?
Mhm.
Like, I don't think companies are going to get away with kind of being neutral, because the employees on either side, let's say, if there's this bifurcation, are definitely kind of clamoring for that. The other thing that you talked about that I think is like super interesting, right? Like people ask us like, what type of companies do you kind of work with? And I sort of put them in two different camps. One is where, and I think well-built bikes kind of fits into this category. One is where like the product or service itself, the value proposition drives that social impact. So in your case, you're like, okay, I understand the root cause of this issue. Part of it is this transportation. So what am I going to do to address that need? I'm going to create this bike shop.
That's right.
The second group of companies we look at kind of have like an impact business model. The product or service doesn't necessarily drive that impact, but a core way of how they operate is to drive that level of impact. And so there's a number of different variants on that, whether it's like corporate social responsibility or buy one, give one, or certified benefit corporation, workforce development, like, gosh, I wish I could remember the name of the I think it's Greystone Bakery, right? Like very much invested in workforce development. They're selling brownies. Brownies may not be saving the world, but the way they operate drives that impact.
Okay, I want to double click on that one. So I think you're right. We are a product service kind of impact oriented thing. Like it's very clear. Like I don't have a way to get around. You can earn a bike with us. That's direct, concrete, obvious. And for me, I loved that because it was so one-to-one. Like Jimmy couldn't get there. He was fat and unhealthy. He couldn't get to, it's like now Jimmy's free and can ride his ass over there and like take care of that. And like, I'm like, I love that because I was like that, like laying tiles, like there it is. Whereas I have had a heart. So you rattled off like different models of this kind of impact business model. And I'd like to dig into that a little bit. I have questions there, and because I'm constantly dreaming up like, well, what else can we do? How can we engage? And I love, by the way, like the brownie example. So, and the most obvious to me is the workforce development stuff, and a huge inspiration. You probably are familiar, and if you're not, you need to get familiar. Homeboy Industries out in California, right?
I do not.
Oh my God. Oh my God. This is so good. So write this down, but Homeboy Industries, you got to look them up. And then Father Greg Boyle, they call him Father G. So I'll give you this, like Homeboy Industries. Well, I'll tell you a little bit of a history here. So he's a Catholic priest, and Catholics, the priests are usually like given a parish, just like you go here. Right. So this white older gentleman priest is dropped into, I always forget the name of the neighborhood. It doesn't matter, but it's this really rough neighborhood in LA. And it's between these, I think 3 or 4 housing projects. He's dropped right in this little chapel in the middle of these housing projects, with heavy, specifically Latino gang activity in this area, right? Like these projects are at war with each other. Now, luckily, they were Latino gangs, and he's a Catholic priest. And there is a little bit of like, if you wear that collar, cultural, like don't kill the priest kind of thing, like whatever. And he knew that. He learned really quickly, like never take this off. But it gained some like access and respect socially, culturally, whatever. And he starts riding his bike through the neighborhood, and he's like, I'm here now. I'm going to get to know everybody. Well, basically all the youth, young men are in gangs. They're all in gangs, and it's just a way of life. And he's like, so he ends up founding what's called Homeboy Industries. The first thing that he did was, because what he realized was one thing that will bring a gang member. So gangs will respect a job. So if you're in a gang, but you have to go to work, they're like, yeah, go to work. Like, go get dressed up and go to your job. Like that's important. Right. And it was like a feature that he was recognizing. Like, it didn't matter what you did, like you could leave the gang and the activity for employment. And so he's like, so he went to this, I think it was a movie director or something, but he went to a wealthy individual and he said, buy me that bakery in the neighborhood. It's this rundown bakery. Buy it for us. And he started a bakery. But this is kind of your brownie thing kicked this off for me. So he started this bakery. He's like, we're making bread. And he's like, you're hired, you're hired, you're hired. Well, he raised, and this is the most expensive nonprofit kind of social enterprise model because, well, now, so initially he's like, we're making bread. And he intentionally was hiring people from rival gangs and be like, put them on the line together. They're like, I'm not working with him. He's like, oh, I thought you wanted a job. And this dude, you got to go watch this guy's TED talk. It's the best TED talk I've ever heard in my life. It's amazing. But he's like, look, because they're like, all right, fine. I'm not talking to him though. Like, that's my enemy. He's like, but humans don't work that way. And when they work shoulder to shoulder, something happens and they become brothers over time. And I knew that. And so I would put them on the line. Okay, you're making bread. Well, then eventually they're like, we're all Latino. Why don't we make tortillas? And he's like, okay, cool. And right now you can go to like Whole Foods and go get Homeboy tortillas and Homeboy salsa, right? So they have this tortilla company. Then they started a screen printing company. Then they started a home girl cafe where they have like the women, that the counterparts, and they put the women in this bakery coffee shop thing that they started running. They took over the city county municipality e-recycling services. They have a restaurant now in City Hall. They have in the airport, they have this restaurant. Anyway, if you can't tell, I'm absolutely in love with these guys. I flew out there. I wanted to see everything they did. It's the brownie thing you're talking about in the most amazing way possible. By the way, one little detail, since I'm like ranting about them now, is they when they hire you, like your first 6 months of employment, they you show up for work. All right, what's my job? They're like, get better. This is part of the like problem with the model. Like, it's not a problem for those there. It's the expensive nature of it. So they pay them hourly because it's a job. And like during the week, they might say, clean the restroom or sweep that hall. But when you're on site for work, they have tattoo removal services. They have meditation classes, 12-step meetings, counselors around the clock. They just pay you to be in the building. And then he goes, your first 6 months is take care of yourself. Like maybe get some of those tattoos removed, maybe go to counseling, maybe go to the 12-step meeting, start yoga. There's exercise classes, go with these other brothers. And then after 6 months, they put you to one of their businesses. And then after you kind of move through these cycles, and then they have partner businesses in the area where they go, oh, you're leaving our businesses. Even you're going to go work for this other company that I actually met a few companies out there that were hiring their guys coming out of the program. Anyway, so I think of the brownie version. It's like, we're going to make a product. Who cares? Bread, tortillas, t-shirts. It doesn't matter. Like as long as it's not some evil product, right? Like we'll just make the product that isn't itself a it's neutral. Like who doesn't love a brownie or a cookie
right.
or some sugar scrub or, whatever it is. And so then we're going to hire women to do the packaging, to do the processing, to do the shipping, to do the whatever. And it is workforce training. And in many cases, I actually know of one company out there in LA that they had 3 guys that came out of prison, all with murder raps, that they ended up handing over the keys to the entire company. Said, you 3 are owners. You own this like multi-million-dollar construction company. And the guys that started it went and started a coffee shop after that. We're just like, yeah, we're going to do something else now. We turned it over to them. Incredible versions of that. Now you mentioned some, so that one's obvious. This is why I want to drive in on this one. But then these other ones, like, so you have like buy one, give one. The corporate responsibility is what jumped out at me when you said that, because like, I often hear that and go, oh, like greenwashing, right? Like we're you get you. So it's like, there is a real version of this thing. Someone even commented on LinkedIn. There was a story about Level Bikes the other day and said like, oh, this is like corporate responsibility. Like, I forget how they said it, but like they were saying like, it's really that, right? Where I'm like, well, yeah, but it's also not. I mean, it's like, which one comes first? It like begins with neighborly responsibility. It turned into a business, turned into a company, turned into something else like that followed. Versus like the challenge to lots of companies is kind of like, the pet to backdoor in, like less destruction, doing some good. Can you, so the reason I want to dive in is like, I wanted you to speak to my skepticism about like half of the things you named. Cause I'm like, the brownies I get, the other ones, I have questions. So one is to go, no, let me tell you some legit things like you could tell me about Father Greg, Father G or whatever. Similarly, like companies you work with, real life stories. And then maybe speak to that like corporate responsibility thing in a way that like I'm able to continue. Like, I'm like, okay, let's go. I know what we're
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about here.
Yeah, so I think you're hitting on something really important, right? Which is that there's a number of different ways to create impact. And the way I kind of look at it is depending on the type of business that you're running, some of those may be more appropriate than others. The other thing I generally look at is like social impact. There's more of a spectrum. And a lot of times people like to say, you got to be exactly 100% values aligned,
Right.
really like drive that home as much as you can. And then I always look at like creating high impact is either like something that's like high touch, like high impact, or it's maybe low impact but high frequency. And in my mind, that's where like CSR really fits really well. So imagine I have this like blue chip company. I probably, like, for the sake of the world, don't want them to just like continue going in the direction that they're going in. And so the fact that they choose to adopt some form of CSR, greenwashing or otherwise, right? This goes back to the spectrum. Like the fact that they're going to organize a volunteer day and 50,000 people are going to go donate an hour, that actually drives like pretty good impact. Even if we're like, okay, we're going to squint, is this really core to the way they're doing things? And so part of what I look at is like, in totality, maybe overall, this isn't necessarily like the best ESG CSR focused company, but that little effort at high frequency actually creates like a lot of impact. And I don't necessarily want to dissuade them from doing that.
For sure.
By like poo-pooing like the little thing that you're going to go do. Yeah, but that's not really core to who you are. JP Morgan, Microsoft, like whomever, right? And
right.
No offense to JP Morgan and Microsoft. I think you guys are fabulous companies. But like, I think we look at social enterprise has got to be like the hustler, 3-person company that's finding a way to make it work and like super values driven. That's fantastic. But I think we got to look across the spectrum from like solo founder all the way up to like, there's 100,000 employees here. How can we put them to work for 1 hour and make a huge difference?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We had a opportunity to, so Red Bull is an example of a corporate partner that we had at one point because of a program I went through, made some connections with Red Bull, and they did exactly that. They were like, well, we're having like a staff training in your town. We're spending a weekend together. We're just all together doing this thing. We want to do something fun with them, but we want it to be meaningful. Can we do a bike build day with you guys? We'll throw a party in the park. We'll build bikes together. Then all the bikes that we build will go on a ride together. At the end of it, we'll all, and like most of the bikes worked, but they had to like assemble these bikes in like a couple hours, and all of them showed up completely hungover because Red Bull, they were partying all night. They were like dying out there in the Florida sun, but it was exactly the kind of thing you're talking about. And for us, it was huge. We got a lot of work done. They bought a bunch of stuff that they left with us because they're like, well, here's a bunch of helmets you can give to all the Erna bikers. And now we had like the next 20 bikes done. Like we had to go back and like, you know, check them and tighten them up, but they were moved along the way. And it was huge for us because it took weight off of our back to kind of continue the work that we were doing. And I think that's really, that's helpful. That's helpful to kind of like, and by the way, I do generally push back on any kind of purity ethic. That's like, well, you got to be 100% or what? Cause I'm like, nobody's that. It really, even if you think that you are, you know, there's so many examples. There's like, no one doesn't have some blood on their hands at some level. Just, we exist in this society. Like that's just the way that it goes. And so, you know, I'm not crazy about any like puritanical or like, it's got to be this way or no way or whatever. And so I know it's really good to hear you say, but I you know, had to like put that out as well. Like, yeah, I do have a little, a sneeze a little bit, you know, because of some of the things that I've seen with some of these companies can be absolutely destructive even. And there are examples of destructive, because I'm like a sociopath that rolls through town will also do really nice things for people as a way to manipulate and ingratiate themselves into communities to take advantage of them. And there are examples of things like that as well. Do you have, so, okay, there's a few places I want to go here. So you work, I love this. You work with these two, typically you would break them into these two kind of camps. How are you all, talk to me about the mechanism of connecting. So you have like people that go, God, I really care about poverty, or I really care about food insecurity. I really care about climate justice, DEI, something. And then you go, okay. And then we've got companies. How is that? How does it work?
So I'll get into the weeds here a little bit and you could like back me up.
No, all good. All good. We got time. That's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah. So like fundamentally, like if you think about a typical job description is just a big wall of text. And then we're all like, whether it's a resume or it's a job description, we're just like pulling out keywords and then like passing that along to the next step of like a phone screen or then an interview to try to determine like all the softer side of things. And I'd say like our philosophy is that softer side is like what's really driving performance and employee engagement and retention. Things like the mission of the company personally resonates with me. I really love the people I work with. I have the support I need, psychological safety, et cetera, right? Yeah. So like the fact that my resume said I can code in C++ and JavaScript, I can go do that in any number of things, but like, I'll go back to the defense example. If like my older brother is stationed on an aircraft carrier, I'm probably going to resonate more as a software engineer working in defense than like working on a point of sale system, let's say. Mm-hmm. And so fundamentally, we kind of look at two different things. One is when you first come on, you tell us what mission really resonates with you. And so if I go look for marketing jobs, like those are marketing jobs that are only in my mission area. And then the second piece is the format of the job is completely different from a standard job description. The first thing that you see when you open one of our jobs is the mission of that company and why it matters. And then they tell you a bit about the job. And then behind the scenes, which goes to your point about like the matching, we've attached a bunch of metadata to both your profile and to the job. So you tell us like, I prefer like open office versus closed office, or customer facing or not, high creativity, low creativity, strategic versus tactical. And so we're getting to like what your strengths are, what you really resonate with, the environment in which you perform the best, because all this is creating this flywheel. Yep. Where you're doing great work, you're enjoying what you're doing because you're doing great work, and you're practicing it because you enjoy what you're doing. And like, this is all like a very positive cycle. That's on the candidate side. And from an employer, if I'm a social enterprise, very mission-driven company, I benefit from like, I know right away, this is someone who resonates with our mission. This is a believer. And I have some insight into what motivates them. Mm-hmm. And I have some insight into how they perform best, because now I have the data to go like craft this job to make this person fulfilled, to make them perform as successfully in the job as possible. And ultimately, that's what's really driving like our bottom line, right, is really dependent on talent. So we play both sides. We're basically saying like, even if you only care from a pure business perspective, you should be hiring on these characteristics. But also it's like the moral thing to do.
Now you said our bottom line on the is talent. So I was going to ask you about this, like your actual business model. So companies are contracting with you for recruitment purposes. Like how you're saying we can help you find missionally aligned, capable staff instead of you going to, so that's you're in like recruiting for these companies that are hiring you effectively out of a pool of people that are going, I also would like to, so if I came to you, is it that like, I'm just giving you my information, going through some questionnaire, you're getting that data together. Am I right?
Yeah. And so fundamentally we've set it up as a marketplace, and now we're working on better ways to like build both sides of the talent pool and employers. But fundamentally it's self-service. So we're doing some manual matching while it's low volume. Like you come to us and you filled out your profile. We're kind of like reaching out saying, we have a database of 1,200 companies that we kind of like scrape from. But that's kind of like the core of the way we're doing the matching, is it's all self-service, as opposed to like you're hiring OneWork as an employer to have us go source your talent. They're already kind of in the pool. And then we're trying to facilitate that as best we can while we build up both sides of the marketplace.
And so are you like fundamentally a technology company then? That marketplace is actually just processing that data to match?
Yeah. I mean, fundamentally, going back to the whole premise of like, how do we solve big scale problem? Like, we're trying to build something that works at scale.
Yep.
And full disclosure, right? We've been around for a year. So
yeah,
it's
no,
take a while to
absolutely.
get there, but like
100%.
that's the premise is, if you are mission driven talent, this is where we want you to be and where you're going to find that fulfillment. And likewise, if you're a social enterprise, this is where we want you to be recruiting. And by virtue of those two groups coming together,
yep,
now we're influencing anyone who doesn't necessarily fit that profile, like, make impact, making the world a better place a really core part of the way you operate. Yep. If you want to tap into this talent. And that's like the theory of change that's really behind all of this.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense given like the kind of the LinkedIn survey that you mentioned earlier. It's like, and you're right, generationally, we're going, I would really rather do something meaningful that I can't forever now. Our organization operates with volunteers, college students, people that are like, I'm here. We have a dude working with us right now that honestly, we can't afford or really pay anywhere near what he's worth, and we're hopefully could figure that out. But right now he's around because he finished a big contracting job, and he goes, hey, I want to do something meaningful for a while. Can I just work with you guys? Even if you can't really pay me, I'd rather do this than that. Right. And it's like people are out here doing it for free, working their faces off for nothing, because it's what's right. It's where their heart is. And you're right. If you can dovetail those together and align those, it's like, that's the dream. It's the dream for all of us, right? That you can actually do what you most care about, that thing that kind of keeps you up at night vocationally. It's interesting. Well, before I say that, let me ask you, let's go way back in time. I'll make a note so I don't forget though. So what is your earliest memory of specifically what would come to be like the word work? Like, what, it goes far back as you can and go, how did you come to understand what work is? I'll just leave it at that.
Man, like, I think I'm going to spitball here a little bit.
Yeah, it's great.
So like, if I were going to, the first thing that really comes to mind is we moved around, like when I was 7 years old, 8 years old, like 10. So my dad would like take another job. And I think that's probably like, not that I necessarily like super strong memories of that, but I think that's the first thing of like, okay, we have to go to where the work is. And there's this concept of like, that's where livelihood's kind of attached.
I did that too, by the way. Yeah. Up until 9 years old. So before 9, I did that a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that's probably earliest. Like,
what did dad do?
So dad was accounting first and then finance. And that like, obviously it pays a lot of dividends too. So we used to have like dad's bank, and dad's bank was an Excel spreadsheet, and it taught you about compound interest.
That's awesome. Good lessons to learn.
Yeah. And we were pretty lucky because my parents like definitely done well for themselves, but we're like one generation removed from like not having a whole lot.
Yep.
And so like carried a lot of that culture and the way they raised us. And so like even like elementary school, middle school, high school, like we're going to go volunteer at the food bank, or we're going to go volunteer downtown for XYZ event. And so I would say that that's probably my first experience kind of working, so to speak.
At the volunteering.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely resonates. What's interesting is like the food bank was probably, if I'm looking back, like probably the earliest engagement. And it wasn't until I started OneWork last year that I was able to like get the flexibility to go invest in that again. So now I'm like basically like feeding Tampa Bay every other week.
Nice. Trinity Cafe.
More like the sorting.
Oh, you go. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
At the warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
But I think that's probably core to say, the way you're kind of influencing that impact early on your kids, like they don't necessarily like forget that, right? Like you're teaching lessons about stewardship of your community and civic engagement, that even if it kind of goes away for a short period of time, that's like ingrained in them, that's
Well,
like a core port.
by the way, the reason I asked that question is the observation of something being ingrained. And it's always fascinating, the different answers that I get to that, because it's like, it was tied to livelihood, all right? Like tied to livelihood. But then you're also go, yeah, but work and like meaning and civic engagement was actually like, I worked hard, not for income. Cause one of the challenges that let's say a core thesis or reason that I wanted to have this conversation, like at large, like this show in general, talk to everybody about their relationship with work is, I walk with, let's say, lots of people that don't have employment, lots of people that may not get employment, may not be able to sustain employment, right? There's lots of stories out here. And yet those people need to work. Like I believe, like what that thing I read at the very beginning, it isn't just employment. It's like, well, then let's build a bike because you need transportation, or let's work in the garden and grow food because you need food. Pick up something heavy because you need it. Like life is more meaningful when you do hard things and have problems to solve. It's just a fact. And you could almost arbitrarily pick. Now it'd be even better if you had a meaningful goal. But like any goal will do. Like just, I'm going to run there. I'm going to get there or whatever. I'm going to build this sandcastle. I don't know. Find something meaningful to invest yourself in. Let's build bikes. Let's grow gardens. Let's do something. And that conviction is very deep because I'm watching how people waste away when they do not have work. And then I could say, and this is me echoing a hero of mine. This is from the Great Depression. This guy named Peter Morin, who I'm in love with. He was one of the founders of what was called the Catholic Worker, but he, during the Great Depression, would go sit down with men that are eating at the bread line. And he would go, why aren't you working? And they're like, there's no work. No one's hiring. And he's like, there's work everywhere. Like, look at that street. It's dirty. Look at that. Like, you need to work. Like, you need this bread. You need to work. Go offer your work as a gift to the community. And then maybe the community will look out for you. Like just bet on Social Security or something like that. Like, but the reason I bring up what's ingrained is what I find is if I say, what's your earliest memory of work? Generally, people will say something about their first job or employment or what mom and dad did. It is employment based. Now, there is major overlap on the Venn diagram, like to your point, and all that you guys are doing, going, yeah, but we work really hard at our jobs. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I go, no, I love this. The overlap. I actually think you have a unique version of this that to me is very interesting at this overlap, because I want to differentiate employment and work personally. I go, I actually think it's dangerous. And the reason I think it's dangerous is because look what tech is going to do. So the drivers 100%. Are unemployed. The cashiers are unemployed. The discovery lawyers are unemployed. A lot of the things that we're doing, apart from the soft skills you were talking about, are it's a wrap. It just hasn't all played out yet, but it is predictable. And I go, wait a minute, if all of you are about to end up in the situation of the unemployed guys and gals that I know, I need to tell you something. You better not stop working. Like, regardless of someone's calling or paying or doing whatever, you will die. I think it's deadly. And I see it coming in such a massive way that that's why I started this podcast. It was like, we need to talk about our relationship to work. I see your wheels spinning, so I'll just shut up and let you kind of like respond to some of that. Cause I do want to scratch at this with you.
Oh, 100%. So this is, I'll offer, I think, where this conversation spirals out of control in a good way.
Okay.
I've often talked about like the auto workers, right? So you talk like 20 years ago, globalization, we're sending jobs out town, Youngstown closes down, whatever it is, right? From an outside perspective, it looks like someone lost their job. But from an inside perspective, they lost that sense of self and identity and purpose.
That's right.
And you talked at one point about like tiling, right? Like, oh, I enjoy laying tile. I can see like, oh, I did a good job. And there's this like cause and effect.
Yep.
and I put something out in the world and I didn't necessarily see it return to me. You also hit on something like super crucial in my mind, like the operative question, and the one that I think is going to destroy us in some sense if we don't get it right, is what if not everyone needs to work in the employment sense? And how much of our self-worth is attached to that? Because the reality is we probably don't need everyone to be working. And the underlying social impact of that, and I mean that not in like social and environmental impact, I mean that like the social impact on us as society and the ramifications there are going to be enormous.
No, it's apocalyptic. And this is exactly the thing that I would go, no, everybody does need to work in the sense that I'm talking about. Like, you look, I get you have nothing, you have no employment, right? You need to go sweep up something, do something. You need it. And I think that's categorically true of human beings. I believe that. I believe we were created for it, to build, to work, to create. Now on the flip side though, I go, everyone absolutely does not need to be employed. And I'm like, and as we see tech scale, like it's more and more obvious, and humans need not apply to so many things already. And that's just going to grow and grow and grow. And it's, there's I don't know if I'm going to get his name wrong. There's a YouTuber called, I want to say CGP Gray. Do you know this guy, or CPG Gray? I get the letters mixed up, but he actually made a video called Humans Need Not Apply. And it's like 5 times longer than most of his little he does like fast animated education videos. But at one point in this video, because he goes through phases of like different industries and how tech is like quickly gonna eat their lunch, basically. And this is an old video, but at one point he has this image of 2 horses talking to each other when they see like a car drive by. And they're like, sure, that electric carriage is never going to like take our jobs or whatever. And he's like, and then like cut to like, name a working horse. There's like the Clydesdales, and you know what I mean? There's like a couple horses working at this point. And most of those are like for our entertainment, actually.
100%.
And he's like, and as it went with horses, so it will go with the humans. And but the video, while it in the end almost seems like bleak and apocalyptic, is also, I think, quite hopeful. But it is like you're saying, the operative question. And if we don't get this right, this could be impending doom. This could be a horror story of a what do they call, like a prediction. And yet at the same time, it's unbelievable opportunity. And by the way, just on an aside, there's my friend in Germany, he's like, there's people that are not allowed to work, and they're actually, they have something like a basic income that they get from the state, because it actually is not in the population's best. It's like, actually it's easier to like, here's some money, make sure you got food, house over your roof over your head, whatever. And like, find a way to contribute, work at the whatever. Also, by the way, there's no like soup kitchens, because they take care of folks there in this way. But like, I actually think is related. I don't think universal basic income is like some like political difference question, as much as just a pragmatic technology question, where I'm like, oh, it's an inevitability, or some version of something that provides for basic needs to human beings that decouples it from the work that you do, or the product that you create, because that's just an unsustainable thing entirely.
Oh yeah, no, I'll go back to something you were talking about, I think a little bit like adjacent to this, right? So like Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like you have your fundamental needs met, and then suddenly you have all this like complex challenge of external factors and self-actualization. And I think like once you cross that threshold, you're good. But up until that point, it's about the money.
Yeah.
And we don't even like worry about all the other stuff. And so I think whether it's UBI or something else, like I wouldn't say I was like a huge proponent of any of that before, but the more I like thought about this issue, does it help solve that? Like I'll also look at it like globally, how do we help support each other? I stopped thinking about what others need when I'm too worried about what I need. And so that's like, can I satisfy the bottom part of that pyramid? And does that help flip the script on how people treat each other as well?
Let me give you a question related to Maslow's hierarchy and the question of, and I want to say, I could be wrong about this. I want to say it was actually a recording I heard with Joseph Campbell. You know who Joseph Campbell is?
I feel like I'm getting educated, like with every.
Well, Joseph Campbell he wrote a book called Hero with a Thousand Faces. He studied like mythology. Like I have like these I'm gonna pull my whole bookshelf down, but I have these like video series here. It's called The Power of Myth. It was like a 6 segment. There's like 6 VHS. I don't have a VHS player, so I can't watch these videos that I have anymore. But like, it's a very famous interview he did with Bill Moyers. But he was a writer, thinker, and the guy. If you can, I mean, go on YouTube and just watch a video or two of this guy. He's unbelievably poetic, and like he's such an orator. But he's a storyteller obsessed with myths of religions from around the world. He's like, look, mankind uses myth. Period. So we tell stories, and this is how we pass on wisdom and knowledge and meaning and understanding. And like, there's a real power to these stories. And so what's cool about listening to him is doesn't matter what culture you're from, he's going to tell you from other cultures. Like there's this Native American story about this woman that married a snake, but she didn't know that it was a snake because he looked like a man. And it tells this story, and it like has a moral, and like there's symbols that run through all these. Okay. So anyway, that's Joseph Campbell. But back to the self-actualization, Maslow's hierarchy thing. I think it was him, and was probably really late in life because he's referencing whatever. So he, I believe this dude died in the 80s, like 87 or something like that. In any case, he said, he referenced Maslow's hierarchy, and he said exactly, he's like, this is what everybody says. Like, you got to take care of like food, and then this, and then like self-actualization. And he's like, but I can't stop thinking that that's wrong, because he's like, there's, I forget exactly, I'm not gonna be able to quote this right, and I hope I don't screw. He's like, you have all of these people that live by something else entirely, like a myth or like meaning. He's like, they're typically religious people, but like, he's like, you had the Buddhist monk who poured gasoline on his head and lit himself on fire in protest of what was going on I forget exactly where that was. I forget exactly where that was, where there was like this repression of these Buddhist monks or whatever. Everybody knows that iconic image. Or you have like a Dr. King who's going to go, I'm going to walk straight into hell and abuse, or a Gandhi or whatever. And he rattles off like these heroic, or a Mother Teresa. And he's like, these are people that for some reason have placed others before themselves, that have foregone, let's say, reproductive good or security. They live in insecurity. And he's like, and perhaps and so I'm going to try to do you a favor, and like, perhaps at the top of Maslow's hierarchy, there is a way that you can be like liberated from the concerns of these things. Like I often think about like a Gandhi. I have this like Gandhi's autobiography actually back here, and in the cover there's a flap. In the flap there's a photograph of Gandhi's possessions at the time of his death. It was like a pen, a notebook, glasses, sandals, maybe 2 pairs of sandals. There was like a tunic, and I think like a loom or something. It was like just like 6 things sitting there. And I gave a bunch of friends that lived on the streets these like cameras back in the day, and I said, I want to do an art series like in my shoes, so take pictures of your life, whatever. And this dude Harley came back, and I have this image I call Harley's squat, but it was like his spot under the bridge, right? And it reminded me of this Gandhi picture. Like it's similar. It's not as like staged and clean, but he has about 6 things. You know what I'm saying? It's like a milk crate. Right. Here's my shoes. I have that place to lay down. You know, I have this notebook, whatever. And yet I was like, man, these look like the same thing. And so this is a lens on poverty. They look like poverty. But one of these is like a liberated human being who's like, I'm free of these things, like of the need for these things, whatever. And one is a kind of captivity. Like I don't have access to any of these things, right? Even though they look like the same number of material possessions, they represent some symbolic like very big difference, right? Anyway, I want to hear what you think about this, because I actually wonder, I think about this statement that was made about Maslow's hierarchy, and I wonder, because you're like, well, if we can get people past that, and I think you're 100% right, by the way, then you're able to care for the neighbors and the people around you. But then I go, what is this dude what is Campbell talking about? That is like this. Now it's fair enough. Like I said earlier, some people are just cut different, and you have these people that are obsessed and like will throw their body to the flames. That's not the general population. And that probably, I mean, that's exactly what he was saying. But what he was saying is, he's like, I don't care about Maslow's hierarchy. I want to live by whatever they're living by. Like, I want to live by the stories that people who throw their bodies into fire live by, or I want to live by the stories that let people go walk into places that they're definitely going to get shot at, or whatever that thing is. Right. And he's like, and that was, that was his entire life's work, is like meditating on what those stories are. But I'm curious how that lands, because it immediately comes to mind now when I hear reference to the hierarchy of needs.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I think the first thing I'll offer is, I would kind of almost look at it as like an interesting thought experiment, like a lens through which to kind of view the way people seek actualization. But then I'll also offer, I think, like, John's self-actualization and Greg's self-actualization are two totally different things. And it's going to come out of the way we've kind of experienced the world and the perspectives that we had. And in some sense, like what we were born into, right? It kind of sets the baseline. Mm. And so like, I'll even look at like what I've been doing now. This is a really, really like first world problem kind of way of looking at this. But like, I was obviously making tons of money as an engineer. We're like pre-revenue doing what we're doing now. Mm-hmm. I appreciate going out to eat way more now than before, mm-hmm. because you've like cut back on that perspective. Mm-hmm. And so I think those people kind of throwing themselves into the flames, let's say, have a certain idea of what, arguably like comes after, what success looks like in life. This is what I really believe in. And so I'm going to put my full humanity into this situation. I don't know whether you call that self-actualization or not, but I think it comes from like a really clear understanding of your purpose and self, and that's self-identified.
I love this, man, because I actually think, I don't know if it feels this way to you, but it feels like we're really getting somewhere with this, because like, to me, you talked before about the vocation, the loss of a job. Let's say it was at Youngstown or somewhere where it's like, mm-hmm. it looks like you lost a job, but you lost like self and identity and purpose, all to back to the childhood thing, to go, no, that's actually the question. The question is intended to go, what was ingrained in you? And actually, we ask children, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Yep. Rather than like, what kind of person do you want to be, or what activities do you want to do? Right. And it's like, we actually fuse work, job, and identity together in a, what I believe is a very, very unhealthy thing. Like, I would say, like, that's not, if you lose your job, I mean, even me or you doing something that's like your life's passion, it's like, yeah, but if the well ceases to exist, like, I'm me tomorrow. Right. Mm-hmm. I remember wrestling with this. This was like 7-8 years ago. I took a little sabbatical for a summer and just wasn't doing those things. And I was like, whoo, this is challenging. Like, what do you do when you're not doing those things, and like all of that's tied together. And I do think, you can take all these like heroic lives and people that can live the life of like but it is a unique individual that has a transcendent mm-hmm. calling. Like vocation, like we use the word vocation, is like a calling. And maybe there are people who hear a sacred voice calling, like from the myths, and go, I could surrender my body to the flames because I found something so meaningful in this world that I can like waste myself on behalf of it. But that's not, and maybe that's I could pray for that to happen to everybody. Right. But at the same time, to go, yeah, but the bulk of humanity, the bulk of us, actually need to make sure that we've got, we need to have some shelter, some sex, some food, some friends, some, you know what I mean? It's like, we really actually need those. And it's interesting, like talking with you, I actually am falling more and more in love with what you do, because of the pragmatism of what you're doing. Is like, sure, that's great. ideals. Those are great. But this is existentialism and pragmatism where it's like, look, yeah, but in real life, people get up in the morning. They usually work like 9 to 5. They go to Monday through Friday, and they spend all of their time on these things, and they use their skills in exchange for finance. There may be changes, updates that need to be had there. But this is the system in which we live. And I'm building out a model for people to find the most meaningful opportunities for them to do that, to find the most fulfillment. And, and then, also a paycheck, by the way, also like these things where it's like, well, you don't actually have to die to be a good person. You can like do that, and get a paycheck for it. And that would be good. And I'm like, I love this, man. I really do. I'm like, I'm a big fan of this. Now, did you want to say something? Because I was going to ask you another question, but
so I'm laughing because even before I went and started doing this full time, I used to joke like, we want to let people in, we want to help people get into and out of an existential crisis.
I always want to help people get into one. Like, that's like, I feel like my life's calling is to cause existential crisis. But you're right. You do also need to get out of them, but it's, unpack that statement. I'm actually fascinated by that, because there is a way in which you're obviously going to help someone get out of one. But then you go, but then now you're going to go into a career where you're going to look at very impossible problems now. Welcome to the new existential crisis.
Yeah. So, gosh. So I guess I'll channel a little bit of Zappos. So Zappos has done a bunch of research on happiness, and the framework that I kind of memorized from those guys was like 4 key fundamental cornerstones of happiness. So the first was perceived progress. Second is perceived control. Third is quantity and quality of relationships. And then the fourth is vision and meaning. And so like naturally like baked a lot of that into what we're doing. But I think in this case, we're talking like vision and meaning. The other thing is like psychology would tell you like there's this thing called status quo bias. And so you have a lot of people who are like content in their lanes, and there's some stability. And when you build a habit, right, it takes less energy. And so there, in my mind, needs to be like this shock. Like someone needs to like put you into some pain in some sense to get that clarity of like, look at yourself from the outside.
Yep.
Do you like what you see? And did you know that there's more to life than this? And I mentioned before, like fixed mindset versus growth mindset. I think a lot of people are kind of like conditioned to say like, wherever you got to, like that's where you are. And there's no progression in one way or the other, or to measure progress in different ways.
Yeah.
Because I think you also ask people a lot, like, how do you define success?
That was coming. That's coming. If you want to.
So I think that's part of it too, is like, if you get to the point where you can kind of self-reflect and build that self-awareness, that's like crucial to finding your own like personal fulfillment. But I think like purpose is such a core component. Like when we're talking about separating work from employment, I think like with work, what we're talking about is like, I have some sense of purpose and I'm going to go create an impact, cause and effect on the world. And employment's like, part of my job is to like get some paid, get paid to put food on the table and a roof over my head. But like ultimately, and even just like to go a little bit further, like when you talk retirement with people, like I'm excited to have all these ideas about what I'm going to go do. But I think like the core thing that you lose in some sense, particularly in our culture, is like that sense of purpose that came from the work that you were doing. And I feel like you have to like keep working in some form after that in a way that's like, I would argue is external.
Yeah.
Like working in your community for the service of other people and not necessarily like internal. Cause that's, I think, when you waste away.
I mean, I think you're entirely right. And I actually think I think retirement's deadly. I think it's a terrible idea. Like, what are we talking about? Now, except I know people that retire from a career and then work on a passion project or thing that they've been wanting to do there. And that's awesome. It's like, but it's exactly that thing. It's like they have purpose and meaning and calling and, conviction around those things. And similarly, I'm like, whether it's retirement or unemployability or replaced by technology, it's a deep concern of mine.
I mean, the parallel though, right, is why am I here? That question of, in theory, we're all trying to figure out the answer to that question. Like that purpose is the answer, and it's kind of unique to whoever you are. But I think those two things kind of run parallel. When you talk about like someone kind of wasting away because they don't have that sense of purpose and that clear goal, I think like it's about as far away as you can get from being able to answer that question of why you're here. You literally don't know why.
I'm curious because like it feels like you're quite good at like zeroing in on these questions. Even like you seem like a good philosopher even, and I'm like, okay, so no, and I'm curious, like, does this translate in, if you're able to boil this down and go, no, fundamentally you're like, well, who am I and why am I here, right? And that was the thing that was lost for the person that lost a job. Like it was like, oh, identity and purpose, right? Who am I and why am I here? Are these baked into your onboard? Like, as you're like, people are coming and going, so I want to come through your, and I still don't quite, what am I doing? A questionnaire? Am I filling something out? Like, what am I doing? But then are you walking folks through something that gives you this kind of feedback on like these core convictions and pieces of who they are? Or like, what is it? How are you guys, is this baked into the thing that you're doing? Cause it seems like it's intended to be, whether it's practically or not. I can imagine that's a challenging thing to be able to do. But it does seem like what you're aiming at, right?
Yeah. So I think like one of the biggest challenges is part of my background is like systems engineering. I think like ideally like the system, without derailing this completely, right, like is going to influence behaviors by the way like you measure success. And so we're in some sense like trying to design a profile or a job description or a platform that influences people to be more thoughtful around these topics without explicitly being like,
you should give a shit about stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Don't,
so we ask people like, what's your personal mission? And, even early on when people were kind of using this like in the testing phase, they're like, I never thought to ask myself this question. And so we're not like even like, forcing that down people's throats, but just like by prompting that reflection, we're creating this like really deliberate, thoughtful approach to the way you're working. And so maybe I was this person who like had 3 or 4 different jobs and now I'm disillusioned. I'm mid-30s. Is this really all that there is? And we're kind of like trying to shock them out of that kind of mindset and get them to like really reflect on what brings them that fulfillment, but without literally going like, hey, Jeff, what would make you feel more fulfilled at work? It's in the nuances.
People don't know how to answer a question like that anyway. In
it's
fact, and I doubt anything you say is true. Actually, like most people are going to say a bunch of stuff. That doesn't mean it's right. I am interested though in this, like, what is your personal mission? That's a very, very good open question, but very targeted, kind of like right at the heart. And I can imagine people going, shit, I never even thought about that, which is like, takes my breath away to hear. But I go, no, I mean, that's obvious. Like talk to 6 people and you go, yeah, like you haven't thought about this or whatever. And I'm actually really, are there other, can you give me some other examples of questions like that? Or are there things that you're like, yeah, we were surprised to find out, or this really like caused a visceral reaction in people when because you're like, we want to give them a question that isn't, you should give a shit or do this, but it's like teasing out these things, but eliciting a shocked kind of reflection state as they go through this. Do you have other examples of that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's probably like the most shocking of anything that we kind of have in that profile. But we ask people like, what are your ideal team members like? And what's your ideal leadership like, right? Like, so we're getting at to the core of like, what do you value in a relationship without being like, what do you value in a relationship? Or we talk about like your values. And then there's other things where I would say like, we're not even necessarily trying to like shock people with the question, but like the number one thing that Google says drives their team performance is psychological safety. So then take a step back and ask yourself, like, how could I hire for psychological safety? In what circumstances do I consider myself safe to take risks around the other people? And so like, as silly as it sounds, like we have a question that's like, what's your ideal dress code? And instead of coming to work dressed as the person that I am expected to be. I came to work dressed as myself.
Mhm.
And now I've like freed that emotional energy to focus on the work. Because again, at the end of the day, we're trying to drive performance and engagement in these like world-changing problems. Instead of like investing all this time and effort, I showed up to work with a certain haircut and a certain set of clothes because that's what's expected of me.
Outward signs of being put together or something like that. That's
Mhm.
very, very interesting. Do you guys do any kind of temperamental or personality type screening?
No. So, and that'll probably echo in everything that we've talked about so far, right? Like we kind of look at self-awareness and triggering that reflection, as opposed to us going like, are you the right level of intelligence, i.e. cognitive testing to do this job? Do you have the
Mhm.
right personality type to do this job? I personally think that's like exceptionally harmful to people, and it kind of reinforces that whole fixed mindset thing. Like you are who you are,
Yep.
and therefore you can only do these things. And we're just kind of like, everyone's a work in progress. What resonates with you the most today? If I prompt you to think about something that maybe you hadn't thought about before, maybe you'll realize that's something I'm going to look for when I have that interview. I'm going to ask that question that I hadn't thought to ask before. So it's
That's
all
that's
candidate
very,
driven.
so it's very interesting. So I'm interested to hear, especially like the idea that that's harmful. Um, I find it extremely helpful in a specific way. So my wife and I, for example, and this is like it is temperamental. I think it is just like this is based on our personality, right? So she is orderly. She is pretty like I'll just break it down like this. She's a great manager. I'm not necessarily a great manager. Uh, I'm a great builder, maker. So like we'll constantly be talking, and I'm like, she works with a school system, so she has a summer off. She's like, what am I gonna do to make money? I was like, you have too much. You could build like a business. Like I have like all of these ideas that she's just like, are you insane? Do you not know me at all? Like I will never be a founder. I am risk averse. I uh I don't like if you create something, I can run it. And it doesn't even matter what it is. I can manage systems. I can be a good boss to people and care about the like emotional and I actually do look at that and go, and this is a very small sample size, but I think these things do map. Like another breakdown is like an interesting one, like from the engineering kind of like more mm, let's put it this way, in the mechanic world, like with the bike mechanics across the board, like go to any bike shop and ask, or just ask anyone that works in the industry, like, how do bike mechanics act? Like just, and it's like it is a fairly misanthropic group of people. They're crotchety. But and actually find this really interesting. It's not because of the work. It's like the people drawn to this kind of, they're thing oriented people. And they
Mhm.
actually aren't in love with like talking to other people. They want to like do nuts and bolts, and it like makes sense to them, like temperamentally, right? Whereas like for others, I'm like, I'm pretty people oriented. Like I want to dialogue and engage and hear and learn, like, that kind of thing. And I do think those things break out over like swaths of, it isn't to say, well, you can't do this job or you can't do that, like filtering people maybe out based on something like that. However, I do think like if you were placing my wife and you didn't have certain information, right, they would be like, that's a very simple metric that isn't like an IQ or cognitive capacity, but to go like, it's an orientation that I think is just based on temperament, right?
Mhm.
Is and that, and I'm pushing back on you saying that, but also to go, now I have a question, like, tell me about that being like harmful, or that may not be what you were referencing, but like that framework. Cause for me, I utilize that constantly to go, because I want to, like you go, I want to get people in a position where they can thrive. And there are things just to know things about an individual. Like I have like my sister has a child. He's like he's like older than that now. He's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
young boy, right? this kid is wildly orderly to the point of like, I'm like, that's a problem. Like all the cars have to be facing the same way. They're like color coded. Like he's like OCD child, right? And so I go over and screw with him. Like I turn him around and mix the colors up because I'm mean. And like, and like he can't take it. Like he's got to put him back into place or whatever, which I have fun with. But I go, that's a feature of that person and will be forever. Now there may actually be things that could be like, maybe there is psychological things. Like, I don't know. I'm not saying there's an issue there. He's orderly temperamentally, and probably he will be more prone to look at spreadsheets than John is, let's say. Right. And isn't that true?
So I definitely think those types of tests can be helpful for finding some sense of clarity. I think the challenge in my mind is who initiates that assessment.
Okay.
So me sending the assessment to John to find out if he's valid for a specific role is a little bit different from John saying, I'd like to learn a little bit more about myself, so I'm going to take this test. So I think it becomes really damaging if you're excluding people based on, in some sense, what the computer tells you. And then there's a certain, like, this will sound a little bit cynical, but there's a bit of confirmation bias built into some of those things too. Like if I came back and I told you, your Myers-Briggs says you're the inventor, and you're reading through and like, yeah, I am kind of like this.
Oh, sure.
There's almost this, like, I'm convincing myself that I aligned all those things that kind of came out. And I guarantee you, like, there's some sense of truth to the words, but there's a little bit of like astrology in my mind of like, I read the horoscope and it told me this is the kind of day I'm going to have. And I've convinced myself that that's the kind of day I'm going to have.
Yeah. I actually think, and by the way, mentioning the Myers-Briggs, I do think that's a fairly accurate, I think this is a helpful metric. It gives you some rule of thumb type guidance. But it is a little confirmation bias in that way. And interestingly, so I like all of these things though. I really do. I think they're like really helpful tools, but like, I think the one that I've been most intrigued by is actually the Big Five kind of ocean thing or whatever, because of its based on a swath of the population where it's like, well, in a group of 100 people, it's like a statistical analysis rather than a personality type. So this is interesting to me to break the difference between temperament and personality. On Myers-Briggs, and by the way, this is absolutely true. So I'm an introvert, like wildly introverted. I want to be by myself. I am people oriented, but I could easily just go into a cave and read books and write and whatever. I would love to do that. I do not gain energy by like going to a party. That'll tap me out, right? Even though I spend my entire life with other people. So vocationally, it's not obvious. However, temperamentally, on a temperamental scale, I rank really high extroversion. And it confused me. I was like, wait, how's this possible? These are broken. They're broken, right? Like am I an introvert or not? And I go, experientially, I know I'm an introvert. There's no question. So now I go, well, that one's wrong, this temperament thing. And so then I start reading about it and it goes, well, no, all that means is you are assertive and enthusiastic. And I'm like, oh, I am assertive and I'm very enthusiastic. And so this is confusing, right? Where everybody reads me extroverted. Like, oh, you're an extroverted person. I'm like, no, I'm assertive, but I can't wait to leave at the same time. And anyway, but to me, and not to like deviate us into like this, like thing about these tools, but I that's the thing that I've been personally interested in is like this temperamental scale rather than going, you are a blank personality. As going like, well, no, if we like mapped 100 people and had you line up like how tall you are, or how much like weight you could curl, or how much you like being with each other, or how much, there's like a way that you rank in the general population. And neither side of it, they're assets on both ends. So like so there's like a temperament trait called agreeable. If you can't tell, it said in a room of 100 people, there is only one person less agreeable than you, or more disagreeable than you. I am off the chart disagreeable. Means I'm impolite and not really very compassionate temperamentally. Which, by the way, it's funny because my whole life is oriented around like compassion work, but that's a philosophical decision. Like I'm like pragmatically compassionate. I'm like, no, yeah, but actually I don't like stay up crying about someone that got hurt. Like that's true. It's actually true. I think that's why I last. And so there's an like I think I can last a long time and work like this because I'm disagreeable, but it also means I could be a dick, you know, in a lot of places. Whereas someone who's super agreeable, might make a much better, let's say, nurse, or a much better, like there's positions or places where it's like, no, you actually would do well to be like a polite and compassionate person in this environment versus having John in here just wanting to break stuff and make people have existential crisis.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think like ultimately we were talking a little bit before about like creating this flywheel, like at work, like, okay, if I enjoy what I'm doing, I'm going to practice what I'm doing, I'm going to get better at it. It's going to give me a better sense of fulfillment. And so I think like, if you look at a lot of those different areas, getting that sense of who you are and understanding how to play to your strengths, I think like there's a ton of value in that.
So much, dude. Now we've kind of like, I know, gone all over the place, but I like doing that. You did say though, like when you find that alignment, you're like, that's where, I think you said that's where a lot of this like grit comes from. And like what did you mean? And then why is that the case?
So I think I'm going to go a little bit adjacent because you were talking about like the bakery, for example.
Okay.
And like I bring these two people in and there's this conflict, but like the mission is a unifier.
Yeah.
And so like I'm part of something bigger than myself. That trumps any discomfort that I have or any desire that I have to quit because this is too important to quit on. And so I feel like if people don't have that like clear sense of purpose and there's something like bigger than something that they're really invested in, that's how you kind of lack the grit. I think the grit really comes from like, I'm willing to stick things out, but the reason I'm willing to stick things out is because this thing's too important for me to quit on.
Yeah. So the motivations, become both internal and external then, right? There becomes like some sort of like compelling reason, which actually like speaks to even some of the people that do the things that we go, that's impossible, is because, well, something else, something bigger than themselves called them to it, which is like a really good way. Now, you did point out that I asked people about the way that they define success, and you have at many points said, well, it depends how you define success, or what's your measure of success for that system change, or what's the thing that is success. So I am, and you spoke to this already a little bit, but explicitly, I want to just go, okay, now, how do you, Greg, define success?
Yeah, so I thought about this in advance. Probably a good thing I listened to a few of your podcasts. I knew it was coming, but
cheater.
I mean, I think so for me, this is like a really weird way to put it, but it's kind of like you get to the end. Maybe this is a morbid way to put it. You get to the end and you're okay with it. And then I think for me, it's a matter of like figuring out what that really means to you personally. Kind of like you have this one life to live, any number of directions that you could have gone in, directions that you probably wish you could go in if you were given the other opportunity. But I think like the cliched way to put it would be like, did you live with no regrets? Like you got to the end and like, yep, I'm fine. Life well lived.
Okay, question.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to beat the temperament drum, but I am curious about this. So back to my own. So I am quite familiar with and interested in my own, what I think is a fairly, it's not a unique temperament, but it's like not like everybody else all the time. Right. I feel so like exactly the way you put that. I'm like, I'm okay, but I'm generally okay. This might be because I hit my head really hard in a car accident when I was 17, where I'm like, no, after that pain, everything's fine. Like literally nothing is wrong. Like people are dying out here. Everything's fine. Like, I don't care what you're going through. It's fine. Everything's okay. And I am okay with who I am. And I'm okay with what's happened because it made me who I am. And like, and I do think some of this is hard won. So some of this is temperamental and some of it's hard won from going through hell. However, I also think that what you're saying I almost want to push this back on you in some like I think what you're saying is super insensitive to people that are sensitive. No, like like what because what I mean by that is like some people are almost plagued by second guessing, something like regret. Like this is actually a temperamental feature, I think, for some people. And I'm because I guess like based on your definition, I'm like, man, I couldn't be more successful. Right. Like I'm like, because I'm just good. I mean, I just don't think there's anything. There might be like one thing I've done in my life that I wish I hadn't have, but I did it. And so whatever, you know what I'm saying? Like, but like, I'm good with who I am and I'm okay. But again, I don't think that's some like victory of accomplishing something as much as like, as much as like, I think I am. This is a kind of, we talk about privileged people, like you're privileged because of your gender, you're privileged because of your sexuality, you're privileged because of this, that, and the other. I think more than any of that, I'm privileged like psychologically. Like I'm good actually. Like I'm very, very, very stable in my emotional state and I'm not that upset about things. And I go, that gives me such advantage. But when you define success, I was like, yeah, that's basically like how I am all the time. But not in a way that goes, well, I'm successful. I go, no, man, I didn't do anything to earn that. I think, well, I either was born that way or I hit my head the right way, or I took the right drugs at some point in time. And and I went through a lot of pain. I do think that's related. I do think enough pain desensitizes you to like a PTSD type thing where I'm like, everything's kind of quiet now. That actually is kind of true. But anyway, I wanted to hear you respond to that because I want to I don't often push back on how someone defines success. However, I wanted to, on the heels of the conversation we just had, it seems like a good question.
Yeah. And I'll offer, like, I'm digesting a lot of this like in real time. So I won't even say this is going to come out fully formed. And arguably, maybe that's the point.
That is the point.
I mean, I think like the way I kind of define it, it's like the final point in time. As opposed to like along the way, the journey, like, material wealth in some sense too, right? Like, okay, I hit a certain point. If I'm going to define that by material success, then like I've crossed that threshold. Now what does success mean? And I think like maybe part of what gives me that sense of like Zen is like a weird way to put it, but like I'm okay because like that point is coming at some point in the future and it's never really achievable. So if I like dial that back to what I was saying about like perceived progress as being like a core component of happiness, like that's an endless wellspring of progress leading up to that point. And I think that might help like you find that center in a way, like as you're kind of working your way towards that.
So if people are listening to this and they're like, dude, I want what you're describing. I want a more meaningful career. I want, John talks about this stuff all the time, but like, I have a job. I don't have time to go be doing all this other stuff. Like, what would you say to them? Where would you point them? Are you guys a resource? Can people like, tell people like, how can you help?
Well, I'd say like I'm definitely open to chatting with anyone. So if you go to our website, like you'll find support link, right? And like just send me an email. Would love to chat, learn more about that background of that story. I think like this is where like the ops guy comes out of me. Like I'm always like begin with the end in mind. And so, like I said, maybe a morbid way to put it, but like, at the end of everything, where do you want to be? And then how do you work backwards from that?
I think that's exactly the right question. It's like, this is a question maybe you could put in your onboarding. What do you want your tombstone to say? But it's like, what do you want your tombstone to say? Or what is the thing you would most hope is said about you at your funeral?
Oh, 100%. So it's not my story, but I'll relay this because it's so on the nose with what you just said. So there's an excellent book by Richard Sheridan called Chief Joy Officer. And the foreword is written by Tom Peters. And he talks about how he's done any number of presentations, but he's got to make like the mother of all presentations. And what do I pick as the first slide in this mother of all presentations? And he ends up going with a picture of a gravestone. And it's like, here lies John Doe, net worth 10,234,000, you know, like whatever, make it up, right?
Exactly.
And like slide 2 is like, no, like this is obviously like a really stupid thing to measure on your gravestone. And that like image has definitely stuck with me for a very long period of time.
It's such a powerful lesson that we hear it and innately go, amen, that's exactly right. We get all mixed up in what matters. And yet behaviorally, day in and day out, we live like that's the gravestone that matters, right? Forsaking time with family and friends, forsaking some of the most important things in life. Well, you had said at one point, like at the beginning of this, where you were talking about like as your company was started, you said that you were in this like engineering role that had gone to like a support role, and then you said that coincided with like the weight of the world, like with what was going on. And then you said COVID brought a sense of clarity to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're exactly right. You know, it's funny. So, you know, I come from like a Christian tradition, and Christians will do this thing called Lent. Most people know what Lent is, right? It's these 40 days before Easter, and like a lot of people will fast. They don't eat. Well, maybe they eat stuff. Maybe they give something up that they love, whatever. And in kind of tradition, that is a reflection. So it mimics the 40 days like Jesus spends in the wilderness, like wrestling the devil and fasting or whatever. But and then that's the 40 days before Easter in kind of the liturgical calendar. But it is a reflection, a time to reflect on like mortality and grief. So like when they begin the 40 days of Lent with what's called Ash Wednesday, where like a priest or someone put ashes on your head and say, from dust you come and to dust you'll return. So the fast begins with a reminder, you're going to die. And then you're going to spend 40 days, like instead of eating, reflect on dying or whatever. Okay. So the church has been doing this for a couple thousand years, right? And this is like a religious thing that people do. And it's like, I think that's probably a decent practice. You know, think about dying, fast, like fasting's good for you. Studies prove that, whatever. However, when it just occurred to me, because it overlapped when COVID started, was Lent. Like it was during that time when it really started here in our country. And I couldn't help but think, actually, I found out that quarantine, the name, the word, the etymology of quarantine is 40 days and is a reference to that period in the desert. It's what quarantine actually means. And so I went, oh, interesting. Wait, this is a lot like that. The whole world is fasting from everything, whether they like it or not. The whole world is thinking about dying. And I went, oh my God, like it or not, we all got to go through Lent, and it was extended. We didn't maybe have a good big Easter celebration at the end, but like we went through this painful reflection on death together. But like you said, it brought about a sense of clarity. It actually gave us a kind of sobriety about that gravestone. Like in behavior, people went, wait a minute. All my life, I'm spinning these wheels to go, I want a gravestone that says I made however many millions of dollars or whatever at a funeral that no one's going to show up to.
Right.
Right. Because I did it by myself, because I had no real connections. And maybe back to your point about, in the end, this like terminal point of your life, that gravestone reflection, that deathbed maybe reflection is, am I okay? What is it going to say? Is like, now in the final analysis, like what actually, you know, that's really interesting, because those I jotted down, shoot, I hope I can find them. Some of those things you said about, you might have to remind me now because I can't find them. The happiness thing that
oh yeah.
It was like quantity and quality of relationships was like a big part of that, right? It was like purpose, meaning, relationships. And these are all things that maybe often get sacrificed for these pursuits. Man, I like the whole, I don't know, I like the morbid reflection thing. I think it's a really healthy thing. Like, what do you want? What do you want on your tombstone? Pepperonis. You remember that commercial?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I don't even remember like the phrase, because there's definitely a phrase in the lines with this, right? But like, it gets you to get into the long-term view when your day-to-day is marred by that like short term.
Yeah.
and that's like about as long-term as you can get, the scale of your life.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like the crucial question to be asking yourself at the end of the day, because that's the other thing. Like when you talk clarity, like if you put it in terms of like, this is where I want to be at the end of the day, it helps you prioritize everything that comes after.
Well, that's right. And that's where you're like, begin with the end in mind and work your way back. And you go, well, this comes all the way back to asking someone like, well, because you're like, what is your personal mission? You're going, what are you aiming at?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where do you want to end up? And depending on how you answer that, you know, I maybe, you know, I want to end up with lots of children around me. Okay, well, that'd be interesting to know. Maybe we should try to curate our life today where maybe we're allowed around kids. One, you know, maybe we're employed by a place that works with kids, something like that, where we like try to align that thing exactly. Like we could figure out what tomorrow needs to look like in many simple ways, depending on where we're going. Is there? Well, I want to leave you some space to kind of like make any direct asks or point people to stuff that you would want to encourage for those that are listening, whether that be to follow you guys, get in touch with you guys, do business with you guys, learn something from you guys, contribute something to you guys. Like I just, you know, here's some space. Like, yeah, what would you like to ask of folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the big thing for us, right, is trying to create density on both sides of that marketplace. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to people committing to make a difference in the world and find purpose in that work.
Mm-hmm.
And we're interested in those stories as well. And like, how can we spotlight that and inspire more people to go do that? So, I mean, fundamentally, you can go to our website. It's onework.co.
Mm-hmm.
You can follow us on social. All on social is Join One Work. And then you can always email at hello@onework.co. I would genuinely enjoy hearing, you know, your perspective on this topic, purpose and work. Like, you know, what clicked for you? A lot of the questions we were talking about, like, how did you find that like path forward? Or are you kind of wandering, and what is it about, you know, wandering that you need help with?
Mm.
Like I mentioned before, I feel like we're facing collectively an existential crisis around identity and self and purpose. And work is the vehicle that we've kind of chosen to deliver that value. Really interested in just connecting with people and helping that kind of find that way.
I really do like how you've said it a few times quite clearly, but it's like there's this big problem. And then I think, or lots of problems, which is the problem maybe. And then you're like, but I had to like land somewhere and do something. And the thing that you're setting out to help others to do, it seems like quite clear that you were able to do for yourself to go, we're going to build this. Like we found a thread that we believe that if we pull this thread can create impact in all of these different arenas. Now you guys are a benefit corporation, are you not?
Yeah, so we're a public benefit corporation, and we didn't really even touch on this too. Like when we talk corporate social responsibility, part of what I was going to say there is like, for anyone wondering like why these big companies don't do this better, when like the crowd is saying we need to be doing more to make the world a better place. Like understand legally, they are obligated to the shareholders. Like the system and the incentives create that behavior. It is not even necessarily that the person at the top, and I realize this would be controversial, but the person at the top probably does care more than you give them credit for.
Probably.
But their incentives are, I have to maximize shareholder value. And so
no, that you're right. 100% by design. That is the way it's set up legally speaking. And it is problematic, let's say, to say the least, because if that is the if that is the only bottom line, well, then we can say people or planet can be damned sometimes because I only have this one bottom line to answer to.
And I think you're seeing that. And so the reason I offer that up is like as a foil to the concept of public benefit corporation, for folks who maybe haven't heard of that before. It's a specific form of C corporation where you write your mission into your articles of incorporation. So now instead of being legally required to only focus on shareholder profit, you're balancing your mission against shareholder profit. So you've now created this like collaboration between all of those stakeholders. And so we knew like upfront, this goes to like the psychology of a loss aversion, like we wanted that baked in articles of incorporation. So we're not having that argument later. And gosh, this is probably a couple months ago, but like Axios had shown like for an ESG poll, for polling the board members at all these companies, like what percentage of people were open to being a public benefit corporation as their way of like driving impact. Like it was like 2%. It was like so small. No one wants to be that later. So it was super important to us to get that in writing, like upfront, because you can imagine like shareholders.
Oh, because you could convert to that later on.
Yeah.
As like if you get a quorum of the board, say this is where we're going to go, whatever. Right. That's hard to imagine in many, many cases.
Yeah. Are we surprised that shareholders don't want to give up full control?
Now, okay. So I'm actually, if you're good for a few more minutes, I'm curious more about the benefit corporation, because I know of it, I am aware of it, but like I'm not as familiar as I wish that I was. And so it's a C corp, so you have shareholders, but you have like you've put this mission into your articles so that you have effectively a double bottom line, where you're like we answer to both of these and we can hold them in tandem. We're not going to give up one entirely for the sake of the other. We are accountable to both of these things. And now I'm curious, what is the difference for the company, other than that legal necessity of the bottom line, and responsibility to shareholders in that way? In the legal sense, I'm wondering, is it change anything in tax structure? And then I'm curious about like investment, because you could still sell equity, you can still own equity in the company. You're just owning equity in a company that you know has it's not the only thing they care about than giving you a 10x return on your investment or something.
Yeah. So fundamentally, it basically behaves the exact same way as a C corporation. There's like an impact report that you're supposed to put out every single year, depending on your jurisdiction. But like fundamentally, it just behaves like any other C corporation. And the big thing it offers you as a company is that legal protection to make decisions on the double bottom line.
Are there publicly traded public benefit corporations?
I don't know one off the top of my head.
Okay. I don't either.
I know like B corporations, for example, which is a certification, like there's definitely public B corporations. I gotta assume there's one for public benefit. I just don't know one off the top of my head.
Wait, so public benefit and B Corp are different?
They are different.
So tell me about this. I don't know this stuff.
Okay. So for anyone out here who knows this, I'm going to do the best I can because it is definitely in the nuances. So there's a nonprofit organization called B Lab that confers what's like the company equivalent of like Fair Trade or Energy Star. It's called Certified B Corporation. And it's like putting a stamp of approval on your company as it relates to like the way you treat your customers and your community and your governance, environmental practices and so forth.
So any corporate structure can qualify for that, where it's like we're an LLC, we're a nonprofit, for-profit, whatever.
Sole proprietor, et cetera.
Got it. Okay.
Yep. And so the way that works is you take something called the B impact assessment. And that on its own is an excellent tool. Whether you're trying to pursue that certification or not, you can go to bimpactassessment.net and take that quiz, and it'll like change what questions you ask based on your point of like structure. Like, am I C Corp or sole proprietor? Or what's my impact business model? And once you cross the threshold of 80 points, you can then submit your assessment to B Lab and they'll audit you in your practices. And if you pass the audit, you get that stamp of approval. And so if you're ever like in the grocery store, I'll talk up like Tillamook ice cream, for example. If you like grab the ice cream container, rotate it around, you'll see a B in a circle. Think of that as like, this is a really excellent company. It's like being able to buy with your values. It's kind of like that signifier.
Like a fair trade logo or something. Right?
Yep. And so B Lab, in addition to that, lobbied governments to create that legal structure public benefit corporation, or in some states, it's just called benefit corporation, to provide that legal protection of focus. So like they recognize, again, the incentives in the system. I can go get that certified B corporation insignia, let's say, or that logo. But that company, if it's a C corporation, is still obligated to the shareholders. And so how do we remove that incentive that drives maybe like behaviors that are counter to what we're trying to advocate? And so now I think, correct me if I'm wrong, like as part of that like B Corp certification, they're actually now requiring anyone who's not public benefit corporation to either reincorporate or incorporate as public benefit as like a condition for getting certified B corporation, because they're trying to make sure you have that like mission lock as part of your business model.
Man, thank you so much for explaining that. Like it's like something you really got to get your head into for a while to understand it with any nuance. And dude, I know I've kept you a while. I appreciate you spending this time. I actually really hope to connect with you kind of off recording here, because I know I could tell just in this, like there's a lot of ways I think that I have other questions, let's say, that we can maybe get into another time. But dude, thank you for spending this time with me. Appreciate you, dude. Thanks for the work you're doing.
Yeah, thanks a lot, John. Glad to be here.